Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, isn't it? We're joined in the studio by body language expert Judi James. Judi, thanks for coming in. What struck you about Armstrong's performance the most?
It was an amazing performance. I mean, I was still sharpening my pencils. I thought maybe we'd get a sort of a slow ease into the difficult questions, but she started it like a lie detector test. And what we got then would be the same thing where you get the reading at the start. That very first question, his eyes moved to the left before he answered it, which would normally suggest that he's accessing recalled memory. But I mean, that wasn't going to be a lie anyway. But it actually led the way for us to be able to see what he was saying and to analyse his body language later on. You've got a comparison. He had no signals of humility. I thought we were going to get a bit of a hair shirt thing. I thought we were going to get maybe a slightly broken-looking man, somebody that wanted the sympathy from the public, maybe even a few tears. He looked very much like a man completely in control. I think there was almost negligible amounts of emotion shown. And it did get quite arrogant. I mean, there was one horrendous part, I don't know if you saw it, where he was asked about Betsy Andre, and he turned it into a joke. I mean, he actually laughed about the fact that he called her crazy, but I didn't call her fat. I mean, that was the tumbleweed moment. You could see Oprah Winfrey's face. I mean, absolutely deadpan. But extraordinary. I mean, not a guy that's looking particularly full of regret. There was a little bit of leakage. He kept pulling his lips in at a certain point, which could be about the fact that you don't want to say what it is that you've got to say. But as I say, this is still a very tough man. And if you compared it, which they did, they contrasted it to a 2005 deposition. There we got a guy very slumped, a very deep voice, a guy who was using a lot of eye dart because he was presumably making up a lot of the answers. This was a guy that looked very confident, and I think the key word with him is control. I feel that he did this to regain control in his life again.
You mentioned that he was quite cold and controlled. If you were advising him, imagine, I know it's a pre-recorded interview, so the second part is already done, but if he was doing that second part live tonight, would you say to him, we need tears, we need a little bit more emotion, we need to see the warm side of you, if there is a warm side? If
there is one. I mean, I have to say I'm not a big fan of the fake tears anyway. We see this with our politicians, we see it with a lot of celebrities when they're apologising. I almost admire the dignity there. But on the other hand, I think that it depends what his goal was. And I think if you go back to the fact that I think his goal was for himself, I think this is a man whose life's gone to pieces, who wants to reboot and to get his control back, then I think he needs to stay in the way that he was performing. If he wants to get the sympathy of the public, if he wants to get forgiveness, then yes, I would try anything. Tears, fall to pieces on the floor. But I don't think he looks like a guy who could act that out. I think he can just act out a commanding leadership, body language best.
I remember after the first presidential debate in the US, was that last year, a lot of people talked about Barack Obama didn't make eye contact with the camera, and that meant that he didn't come across well. What did you make of his eye contact? He's turning to the camera, perhaps being warm with the viewer.
I don't think that was appropriate, to be honest. I think the idea was it was an intimate interview with Oprah Winfrey, I think, and I found it quite clunky when they do it in presidential debates, when they go from talking to this person here and suddenly it's, you sit at home and it almost gives you a jolt. Oh my goodness, they're looking at me. Very few people can pull that off well. Some politicians can. I don't think seeing this guy who was being, if he suddenly turned around and looked straight down the barrels of the camera, I think people would actually be quite intimidated in the state that he's in here with this body language. So I think he was better keeping his eyes on Oprah. And if you saw, she was the one that looked away a couple of times. There was a couple of things that he said that she kind of, I don't know, she looked at her production crew, making it look as though even she was feeling a bit intimidated.
You're making me think twice about looking at the camera now. I'll keep my eyes on you. Were you surprised that he wasn't submissive?
Yes, I really did expect not a huge display of humility, but maybe just a few small signals to show that he was verbally sounding slightly humble. He said he regretted things, but he wasn't displaying it, and I think that was a bit of a mistake. That made his message incongruent, and I think people will more remember the physical message, which this is a guy that really hadn't got many regrets at all.
Very, very interesting stuff. Judi James, thanks very much.
Thank you.